Hey, hi there. Hey, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about women in business at the core of all this, but I want to broaden the scope a little bit as I go along to not only women, but minorities in business as well, minorities of all kinds. So I'm in the small business world when I'm in this discussion. I'm not talking about the large corporations. I'm talking about the salt of the earth, Main Street businesses around the United States. But look, before we get into this, let me do my usual advertisement. Uh, all of these videos that we do week after week after week are on YouTube. It's the YouTube channel, and I urge you to subscribe. Or go take a look anyway, view anything you want. It's all free. But if you can, subscribe, make comments, make suggestions, ask questions. I'll do my best to answer them in a timely way. So any of our live broadcasts, we urge you to do that as well. All of these videos are published on YouTube. So let's get back to the business at hand here. So let's get going. Hey, look, the bad news here is that 2020 was a bad year. You know it. Everybody knows it. But how bad is bad? From the year 2015 through 2019, women in business and minorities in business was improving, but at inches a year in improvement, 1 or 2 percentage points per year, nominal, hardly noticeable. You imagine that for 5 years in this Kinsey report that showed all of this, marginal improvement was made. And here we come into 2020 and the world caves in on women in business and other minorities in business. Significant decline to where we are today in this fallout is 1 in 4 women are leaving their job versus 1 in 5 for men leaving their job. Significantly different than previous years. But centered in this loss are in 3 areas. Working moms, that makes sense, doesn't it? Working moms, that little Johnny and Susie at home that aren't at school. They're home. The husband is got a job too, so something's got to go. If they're not going to be able to get or afford daycare or home care or whatever, one of them's going to stay home, and it's more often than not the working mom. Pretty simple, huh? Believe it or not, women in senior management positions took a big hit as well in this 1 in 4 leaving thing. Senior executives in companies, and for the same darn reason. So these are working moms. They're also working moms in senior management positions. Guess who comes next? Now you probably can't guess, can you? Yes, you can. Black employees, black people in management took a major brunt of this hit in the decline of the workforce. So more than all of the improvement that was made in 2015 to 2019 went up in smoke, gone, back to zero, less than zero. But the United States was actually better off than most any other country, believe it or not. This was all so much worse in other countries. And in Asia and in Europe, the statistics are by far greater in terms of loss of women and minorities in business. So you can say, well, we were better off. We declined less. Well, that's a record to go for, isn't it? I don't think so. So it was a bad year. So there's another factor here, and that has a great deal to do with bias. Bias with respect to relationship with women employees and women executives, as well as black executives and other minorities, executives and employees. The slowness to improve that I just mentioned earlier can be attributed to some of this. And the recognition of this impact of bias is not strong, I don't think. I am no expert at recognizing or dealing with bias. I will have to admit that I have bias. So To me, there's two forms of bias. One is conscious and the other is unconscious bias. Conscious is I know what I'm doing and I know what my tendencies are. I grew up in the 50s, and you talk about bias, coming from a small town in western New York State where there were no black people, maybe 5 that lived there. All the rest were white. And in the summers, the black people would come up from the south to work in our fields and then leave in the fall or late fall. So there was not a lot of representation, and women were traditionally work at home moms, doing the dishes, cleaning, the usual stuff that you think of, mopping the floors, making the supper, washing the dishes, taking care of the kids, and on and on and on. Pretty classical view of what the white family was in the 50s. And pretty much a lot of that still goes on today. So conscious bias is embedded in me. It takes me energy to not be that way. I have to work hard at it. And I correct myself before I blurt some stupid thing out or take some action that would just be entirely inappropriate. But it has taken me years to kind of remake myself from the inside out. But man, all that inside stuff is still there, and it's not as prevalent. I'm much better at not being consciously biased than I ever was. But it takes energy. When I'm in a room with black people or white women of any age, I have to really watch myself. When I'm in a room with white men, I don't have to think about this at all. Isn't that strange? I'm still just as biased as I was with the white women and the other minorities in the room with me. That's a hell of an admission. But this is the way I grew up, and I'll tell you, tens of millions of other people grew up this way. The worrisome thing, though, is the unconscious bias. So we may, to some degree, conquered our conscious bias, but what we often don't realize is how the minorities or the women in the room with us are reacting to what we're saying or how we're acting. It's a use of language that may had no intention of trying to express some form of bias, but did in some way, and how it was interpreted or how it was felt by the receiver of what we said. Our very body language can be intimidating and show bias as well. Forms of eye contact and how we communicate and relate with other people can be intimidating sometimes. We have to work hard to understand the culture and the mindset of the people that we're with in any sort of meeting or social event. So we have to regard the feelings of others. We've got to be inclusive in the way we behave, treating each other as best we can the same way as, and in particular, the way they prefer to be treated. So guess what? This takes even more energy to curb our this unconscious bias that we sometimes show. So for all of you that are, maybe older than 40 years old, maybe older than 50 years old, you may have been raised in very similar circumstances. It's no damn excuse, though, for being biased. Just because we were brought up that way just doesn't work. And what it's doing is significantly impacting women and minorities in the workplace. So if you're an executive or manager or a team leader, you got to pay a lot of attention to this. That's my rant for today. So why am I talking about all this? Because I'm speaking, again, as I said at the beginning, for the small business world. Do you realize how impactful the small business world is today? 47% of the small businesses in America create 2/3 of the jobs. 47%. Okay, so roughly half of the businesses in the United States are small businesses. Two-thirds of the jobs are created by them. 80% of those, 47%, have less than 20 employees. Pretty small, huh? You probably know a whole bunch of companies that are less than 20 employees, don't you? Of the small businesses owned by black people, 88% of them are sole proprietorships. That's one employee. So you ratchet this back up to companies with less than 500 employees. 66% of American jobs come from companies less than 500 employees. A 500 employee company at $100,000 per employee, which is pretty modest, is a $50 million company. Okay, this isn't exactly the Fortune 500 world. The small business world in the United States has a great deal to do with the economic success of the United States. So we need to pay attention to it. And we need to bring people into small businesses and in running them, being executives in them, being great employees and team leaders. So this small business world continues to provide the vast majority of the jobs that exist in the United States. So that's my rant for the day. What I'm telling you, let's make 2021 a really big year, a banner year for growth in women in business and minorities in business. And when 2022 comes along, we're going to say, wow, what a great year. Let's have a really great day and celebrate.